Okay, now we come to one of the major gospel stories. This is one of the few events that are recorded in all four gospels. Apart from the resurrection, it's the only miracle that's recorded in all four gospels. This is a big deal. In fact, the initial account we get of it here in Mark, and then the subsequent accounts in Matthew and Luke, really don't even convey how big of a deal this actually was. We don't really get a sense for just how important this event was until we get to the Gospel of John. And John makes it a very significant event that had a very significant fallout. None of the other Gospels really show us the fallout to this event. But this was a very big deal. This is the feeding of the 5,000. Very famous story. Most people have probably heard some version of the story or familiar with it in some way or another. This is a very big deal. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. So this is apparently after they got done. I don't know how long they were out, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, I don't know. I don't know how long they're supposed to stay in each town, a week, I don't know. But there was a period of time when they all went out and they practiced. Basically they were being taught how to do this. Jesus was giving them a hands-on trial of going out and preaching the word, preparing the path for the kingdom that was going to come. He does this again. In Luke, we read about him doing this again with a wider group of 72 apostles, or disciples. Not just the 12, but 60 others. So this is the first, but Matthew and Mark don't mention that, but this is the first real test of the disciples' ability to go around and preach on their own and not just follow Jesus around all the time. I don't know how long it took. I would imagine at least a few months, but I don't know. But they're back. Apparently, they've completed their circuit around the cities, and now they're coming back. And wherever Jesus was, they went back to him. So the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So he wanted to retreat. I go to a church which is big on retreats. We love our retreats. We have like 8 retreats a year. That's not the same people every time. Okay? We have a men's retreat, we have a women's retreat, we have a couples retreat, we have a young adult retreat, we have a kids retreat, we have a campus retreat, we have, I don't know, we have just every couple of months we have a retreat of some kind. Although again, it's not the same people every time. Or camp, retreats and camps. Those are the two things we love. But Jesus is retreating here, at least he wants to. At least that's the idea. It'll take a while for them to actually get this break. They're going to be kind of hounded by the crowds for some time. They will eventually get the break, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. They're going to be kind of pursued by the crowds. So they went away by themselves in a boat again to a solitary place. Still having trouble there. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large, I don't know where they were going now. We'll read more about this, their movements in the other Gospels. Like I said, we're going to be reading the story in every Gospel. Each time we're going to be seeing a different side of it and getting more details about it. But wherever they were heading, they obviously didn't get there, at least not the way they wanted to. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time, it was like we don't really get an idea of what he was teaching. I'm assuming it was just his standard stuff. Again, Mark talks about him being a teacher, but doesn't include very many actual examples of his teaching. But we do get that in the other Gospels. We get a little bit of it in Mark. We get a lot of that in the other Gospels, and so we have a pretty good idea of what he would have said, even if we don't have the contents of this particular sermon. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away, so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Now we're going to find out later, I believe in John's Gospel, that this was a meal, basically a lunch, that a small boy had carried with him. Andrew finds this kid and brings him to Jesus. And presumably it was just this kid's lunch. He had just packed a lunch or something like that for himself, or some kind of snack, and that's all they could find. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. The green grass fits this time period in the spring. This is probably about a year before Jesus dies. Again, we're going to get more information about this event in the Gospel of John, because this event actually is a pretty significant one, and afterwards, we don't read about it here or in Matthew or Luke, but after this, a lot of the public fear over Jesus actually dies down somewhat, because they're going to want to make him king after this, and he doesn't want to be the kind of king they want him to be. And so he resists that, and the people get disillusioned, and he loses quite a bit of his popularity. He dies in the spring, and the Passover is in the spring, March, April of each year. The Ascension happened 40 days later, Pentecost 10 days after that. That's in the spring. That's probably a year from now. So this is probably about a year left to go or so of Jesus' ministry. I'm guessing. Again, it's hard to say, though. I mean, it really is hard to say. But this is in the spring. The green grass detail marks this as being a springtime event. And we know that the Passover is always in the spring. So this is at least a year before Jesus' ministry comes to a close. Possibly 2 years, but at least a year. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. Crumbs, in other words. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Now from what I read, again, I have to get the footnotes because I'm not a native Hebrew speaker or Greek. The word men here specifically refers to adult males. And there would have been some women. Ow! Stop that! Go away! There would have been some women and children in the crowd too. So more than 5,000 total. Immediately, Jesus. Now, there's a whole lot that actually goes on after this incident. There's quite a bit of follow-up, because this is a big deal. He just made food appear for a crowd of 5,000 plus people. They had basically one kid's lunch that he was able to make last for an entire crowd of people. This is a big deal. So that we know from John that the people there wanted to take him and make him king right then and there. So that was it. They saw that as the sign they were looking for, and this is the guy who's going to provide for them. There's a whole lot that actually goes on after this. Mark skips that and basically goes on the next thing. Matthew and Luke will follow his lead for the most part when they record the same information. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. Again, there's a whole lot more that goes on with that we read about finally in John. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, he went out to, this is late in the night, basically, late night hours here, early in the morning, really. About the 4th watch of the night, he went out to meet them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. I guess they didn't recognize him in the darkness. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. For they had not understood about the loaves, their hearts are hard. So they still didn't get who this guy actually was. Probably, now again, we'll read in John that the crowd that got fed that day wanted to make Jesus king. And probably the apostles did too. They probably were expecting Jesus to become king or want him to become king. And that's what they were looking for. That's what they were all looking for. They didn't understand, and he was going to be king, but they didn't understand what his actual kingship was going to look like. They wanted him to literally take up his throne in Jerusalem and sit there and kick the Romans out and become king, like David had done 1,000 years ago. That's what they wanted. The crowd wanted, and that's what the apostles wanted too. So they're not looking for the kind of king that Jesus is becoming. So their hearts are hurt. When they had, so you could say they didn't understand about the loaves, obviously, but they also didn't understand about anything else. They were just simply looking in a different direction. They saw Jesus as the one, as we're going to read about in a few chapters. They saw it was this guy, this is the Messiah, this is the dude. They saw that. They were correct about that, but they did not see the kind of kingship that he was going to offer, what his kingdom was actually going to look like. They were looking in a different direction. So all this stuff that's happening, the loaves, the miracles, and all the things he's saying, they're just not getting it. Because their minds are somewhere else, and they're not going to get straightened out until basically after Jesus is gone. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. So they're crossing the lake yet again. As soon as they get out of the boat, people recognize Jesus. They're trying to get this break, and they can't get it. They ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick unmatched to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak. And all who touched him were healed. Apparently, the word about his healing of the woman who just touched his cloak without him even seeing her had gotten out. And so now he was saying, all I gotta do is just touch this man. I just gotta touch his cloak. Something that belongs to him, and I'll be healed. Oh, by the way, there's more to the story of Jesus walking on the water, as we'll read in the other Gospels. Peter attempts to walk on water too, and tries for a moment, but ultimately sinks. Now Mark leaves that out. Mark generally is not shy about showing off Peter's. Forgive me, Mark only got material from Peter. In some way, you could say that Peter was the true author of this gospel, since it's based on his accounts that Mark wrote down. And typically speaking, the gospel will not shy away from showing Peter's failures, but in this example, it does. In this example, Peter's embarrassing failure is reserved. Interesting, which the other gospels show it. Interestingly enough.